Hi, I'm Peter Gallison. I'm very sorry I can't join you today. I'd like to be with this great ceremony in honor of the Center for the History of Physics. I know my colleagues, Greg Good, Gerald Holton, Roger Stewart, will have much to say in a more formal vein, so I thought I'd say just a few words about what the center's meant to me personally. I first came to the center when I was about 19. I was interested in the history of physics, and I was writing about Hermann Minkowski and thinking about how I might know anything at all about the history of physics. So it was all new to me, reading interviews, gathering archives from here and there, looking at fragments from the Bohr archives or the Millikan archives or a myriad of different sources that were there, things that were on the shelves that by propinquity I found that I hadn't expected. I was interested in also the people that I met there. I would come frequently to New York. I grew up in New York, and I was in school in Cambridge at Harvard. And I'd come down frequently and go in and just look at things on the shelves. And I began, through listening to some of the interviews that were done there on tape or reading transcripts or looking at archives, to begin to get some sense of what it would mean to go behind the printed paper. But it was more than that, too. There was a staff there with Joan Warno-Blewett and Spencer Wirt, and I began talking with them, and through them meeting other historians who were interested in these questions. The people who passed through taught me a lot as well. When I wrote my first book, How Experiments End, I used the archives all the time, and they led and ramified out to a million other sources. I love the fact that the center was collecting photographs from early on. Visual sources for history of science have become a bigger and bigger part of what I've done as I've turned first towards the analysis of diagrams and images and then towards filmmaking. And with every step, I found the center encouraging, open, and leading to many other places all over the world with contacts that were possible through them. My students, and I was looking and preparing for this up on the shelves and looking across the names of the 55 or so PhD theses of students who have worked with me, many of them have used the center. Many of them, when I was teaching at Stanford, where there were just two of us in history of science back then. And so for the students to come into a broader community through the Center for History of Physics was really a transformative event, whether they were excited undergraduates or advanced graduate students in the history and philosophy of modern physics. It was at each stage, from its origins really in the intellectual internal history of physics, through its expansion outwards to images, experiments, big collaborations, asking questions like, what should you preserve from the big experiments? What was going down on tape or in other forms of data media? The Center for the History of Physics really has moved with the times, and now as it enters into a new moment, they've begun to bring in expertise and contributed to online learning, online courses, online connectivity to archives. And these things have really been fundamental, I think, in opening up the history of physics to a new generation of scholarship. The center is also, through its position in the American Physical Society, also provided a tremendously important link between the history of science and the practicing scientists of the day. And that has been important not only in the acquisition of new records, but in the personal contacts and the intellectual, generative excitement of having a back and forth in the dialogue between historians of physics and physicists. So I went into this work in the history of physics because physics struck me as so astonishing in its double reference on the one side to these very fundamental questions of philosophy, of ontology and epistemology, of what the nature of knowledge is, causality, space, time, simultaneity, the origin of the universe, its eventual fate. And on the other side, questions of absolutely sublunary significance, the extraordinary economic and generative qualities embodied in physics in the production of transistors and integrated circuits, in the electronics revolution, in lasers, in optics, in the new connections with biophysics, and through that, through genetics and all of the new biological sciences, but also through nuclear weapons and weapons of mass destruction and all that went into ballistics and matters of national defense, security, secrecy, and the national security state. This duality between these questions that were fundamental about nature and our relationship to it, and our human relationships in societies and politics, make the study of the history of physics urgent for me, and I know many of you. The Center for History of Physics finds itself at the nexus of these concerns. And all the way back, as long as I can remember, that dual concern between the nature of matter and the nature of our human interactions in our national polities and the politics of science have been central to it. So I'd like to wish the Center for the History of Physics happy birthday and a great next 50 years, commensurate with the wonderful 50 years that have just come to an end. Thank you.